What's going on, boys? Welcome back to the channel. Mick here again, and in today's video we're going to be doing something a little different. We will still have our regular style gameplay, cryo game in the background. However, this is going to be a commentary style video. I'm going to get my kind of thoughts and opinions out there on the current state of the game, what I like, what I don't like, all the good stuff that I want to get out there, my personal opinions and how I'm finding the game as somebody who's put quite a few hours into it already. When it comes to Bungie titles, I am definitely a fan. I've been playing Bungie games ever since I was a kid, and I love them to death, and this is no different. Marathon is a very addicting, very fun competitive multiplayer game. As I'm getting older, I do find myself drawn to extraction shooters a lot more than I would be any other genre, maybe like arena shooters or just any regular FPS titles. When every encounter has that extra bit on the line, that extra part of risk, losing all your stuff, gaining even more, there is that reward, that risk added on into every encounter, and it does, it grants something different that other games just haven't been able to do in the past. And Marathon is no different. Marathon does this in a really good way. I love the items, the weapons, the PvP combat. There's so much stuff I love about this game, and we're going to get into all that in a minute. I'm not going to ask anybody to like and subscribe or any of that stupid stuff. I just want to say thank you very much if you do watch these videos and continue to watch them. I do appreciate you. I really do mean that. So guys, Marathon, to put it short, is a really good game. I really am enjoying it, and when it comes to first-person shooters and arena-style games and PvP games, I just have fallen out with the whole thing in general. I've been playing single-player stuff mostly recently. Up until Marathon came out, I really wasn't enjoying playing any multiplayer titles like I had done in the past. I did try Arc Raiders, but the PvP, the third-person element, the loot system, it just didn't really grab me like Marathon has. Marathon is really fun, and as a Bungie title, it's going to have that Halo and Destiny-style PvP. The weapons are going to feel like those games as well, and all of that I just love in general. I like the different abilities and the characters that we see from the likes of Delta Force. Extraction shooters in the past are going to kind of lean towards that hardcore side, as we've seen before. When this genre did start popping off and did start getting interesting, it was more like Tarkov kind of taking the scene, and as somebody like myself who grew up on controller and doesn't really play those hardcore style games, Tarkov really just didn't really grab me. I did love watching Tarkov players. I did love getting into all the content and stuff like that, but just as a player it just wasn't for me. I wasn't able to make it happen, which is okay. Some games are like that. We're not always going to be the best at every game, and we're just going to have to accept that every game can't be for everyone. In terms of Marathon though, the maps, the gunplay, the weapons, the looting system, everything started off well, and I mean it still is. I'm not going to turn this video into a hate video, because I play Marathon. I have about 200 hours in it. I love playing it, and I'm going to continue to do so. This is just kind of getting some grievances and some points across maybe, and maybe just discussing the current state of the game as it stands in Season 1. As you all know, we have Season 2 coming around the corner, and there's going to be a lot of balances, there's going to be a lot of changes, there's going to be a lot of additions, and this is all to be expected with a new season of a live service game like this. Marathon itself though has got off to a great start. The player base has dwindled down slowly. We have seen average player accounts kind of drop over the months. However, it has maintained a fairly nice player base on Steam, and I'm sure there's plenty of console guys that make up that number as well. So all in all, it is still a success as it stands. As we all know, when Marathon was coming out, there was a big massive hate train for the game. A lot of people making fun of it with memes and stuff. I'm not really sure where all that came from. Maybe it was the art style, or maybe it was Bungie themselves. But the bottom line is, the game isn't bad at all. I do enjoy playing it, and like I said, I will continue to do so. Just to start this video off then, I am going to go through different aspects of Marathon and kind of look at what kind of features and different parts of the game that I've noticed probably need looked at, or probably need changed, or maybe just need adjusted slightly. But like I said at the intro of the video, I do enjoy this game. I want to continue enjoying it. I love Marathon, but it doesn't mean it's perfect. No game out there is perfect, as we all know. People who watch the channel, you guys play a lot of these types of games. You guys play a lot of FPSs in general, and none of them are perfect. It's very hard to find a perfect game nowadays anyway. So first things first, I want to get into is the ranked mode in this game. Now, Marathon did kick it off with a ranked mode quite early into its release, and this is kind of the first time we've seen a ranked mode in an extraction shooter like this. I mean, if you guys have played Delta Force before, you do know there is a ranking system there that you can toggle on and off per raid. It kind of, gives you points if you extract, and extra points if you get kills. Now, this is a very basic way of doing it, and it is not even as close to as strict as Marathon's ranking system or as well thought out as Marathon's ranking system, but this is just an example I'm going to give. A good thing about Marathon's ranked mode though compared to Delta Force is Marathon does feel like a different game mode. It feels like a different type of extraction when you're playing the ranked mode itself. The players are better, you know, the point system, you have to collect loot, you know, key cards, you know, getting out safely. Everything starts coming into play a wee bit more and you're starting to think about everything a wee bit more. The only issue I have with the ranked mode is that it needs adjusted. Now, I do understand that this came out very early in its release, very early in the game's life cycle, so it's not going to be perfect, and I'm sure it was going to be a catching point for Bungie to get people to get on this game and play, because as you all know, we all know there's guys out there, you know, we're friends with them, that only play video games if there is that ranked mode, and I understand it completely. So I do think Bungie used this ranked system as a catching point for the game's release itself. And while I am making these grievances or suggestions surrounding the ranked mode, it is fair to say and to mention that there is a beta symbol beside the ranked mode itself when you go to queue. So this is the developers telling everyone that this system is in beta and isn't fully finished. Now, as it stands in Marathon Ranked, you are required to bring in your own kit, and then you have to fight other players and then take out their kit, and so on, just like we would in regular games. So if you do die, all that stuff that you brought in is lost, and these losses can hit a lot harder, because if you do want to make those ranked points and climb the ladder, you are going to have to bring in a lot better quality stuff than what you would normally do. My biggest issue with this then is what I was mentioning about earlier when we're talking about getting into that, you know, casual player base and getting these casual players into the game. Ranked mode as it stands is a very late game activity. It's a very end game activity for sweats or people who put a lot of hours in like me. You know, it is just for those guys. It's just for people who are end game, you know, who have all the loot, who are able to take time, who are able to, you know, basically sacrifice this loot and still be able to play a couple more ranked matches after. If you're a new player, if you're a casual player, if you're somewhere in the middle, you're probably not going to be playing ranked, and if you are, you're probably not going to be too successful with it. The way to mitigate this then, in my opinion, and you know, I'm no expert, I'm no game dev, this is just, you know, I've played a lot of video games in the past, different genres for a lot of years. In my opinion, this could work as an extraction shooter ranked. I mean, you can't just say it won't work because it's never been done before. You know, there has to be somebody to really take that plunge when it comes to these, you know, extraction shooters themselves. I do think the ranked mode itself then should be a credit style entry where you pay credits to enter into the game, and then there's daily loadouts that you can select from, set loadouts that maybe come in 3, come in 5, but they change every day, and then you pay credits and you select that loadout. You go into a game, and then whatever you do find in raid when you're finishing and you're extracting, all those items are sold and you're given half the value back in credits. Now, why would this be good? Well, it would allow that casual player base to play ranked. I mean, if you only have to pay credits to enter that ranked mode itself, you're going to see a lot more players playing ranked. You're going to run into a lot less cheaters that, you know, a lot of people have been talking about, and it's just going to allow casual players, lower end players, people who don't have a lot of time to enjoy that ranked experience, to get amongst it and become part of the player pool. The point system itself is fine in my opinion for now. I do think that loot has to play a big part of it because that's the genre we're playing and that's part of the game, so, you know, loot value does make sense there. And then with the holo tags, you are getting paid for PvP. If you do focus PvP, you're going to have a lot more scores, so there is that incentive there, which is good, and you know, that is needed. A big concern that has been circulating around ranked mode and just the game itself has been cheaters. You know, there has been a lot of talk about cheaters on X, on Twitter, whatever you want to call it. There has been clips. I myself have personally ran into a lot of suspicious people. Now, I don't call people cheater unless I'm, you know, 100% certain, because I don't, you know, I feel like it doesn't lend to the gameplay or the morale. But in terms of cheaters themselves, people I'm 100% certain they're actually hacking, it has been around 3 certain instances, maybe 4, and they all have been in the ranked mode. I have heard this from other people I've played with, people on X have talked about ranked having the highest population of cheaters. And like I talked about earlier, I do think you run into more cheaters on ranked because the population's so low and there's a lot less people playing ranked than there would be playing regular maps or maybe playing cryo. But yeah, cheating has definitely been a problem that's been floating around. It has been circulating around Marathon itself. You know, prior to this game's release, when I made a video, I did talk about how the anti-cheat news and the stuff they were talking about when it came to cheaters was sounding really good. I was looking forward to it. There was zero tolerance, yada yada yada. But it doesn't seem like they are 100% on the ball. Now, most modern video games, first-person shooters, competitive, whatever you want to call it, all of these games have problems with cheaters nowadays. I myself used to be a big Call of Duty fan. I played Call of Duty every year, and then came like Black Ops 6, and it was so bad I just couldn't play the video game anymore. It just felt like I was at such a disadvantage, and that's what it feels like to some people when it comes to the ranked mode in Marathon. And I do understand a lot of complaints, and like I talked about earlier, when you bring in the loot into the ranked mode itself, if you die, you lose all that stuff. And if there's cheaters floating around in a lot of games and people are running into cheaters a lot, this is going to hit even harder, and it's just going to affect the player count. It's as simple as that. People are dying off the game because they're sick of cheaters. People are losing all their stuff. They don't want to put all that time into the game just to lose it over some guy with a, you know, a cheat engine. So I do understand the complaints and problems people have with cheaters, and like I said, it directly affects the player count. So I hope Bungie are actively looking into this, and we are going to see season 2 coming around the corner. So maybe there's some anti-cheat information, maybe there's some anti-cheat changes there. But yes, as it stands right now, cheaters are a concern, especially in this ranked game mode. I don't know if I speak for everyone else out there, but for me personally, I was so excited when rank dropped, especially Outpost. You know, the making the points, getting the loot, working as a team, trying to get rank points. Essentially, that was really fun and exciting to me. And since then, that feeling has died out completely, and I really don't go into ranked much. I really don't touch it. It's hard to find people who want to play it. So as it stands right now, ranked needs looked at. Next thing I want to talk about is the matchmaking system. Now, with this point, and like all the other points that I'm going to bring up, I do take into consideration that I have a lot of hours in Marathon. I do play this game with every bit of free time that I have. Well, for the most part, maybe not as of recent, but I do put a lot of hours into this game, so I do understand that my opinion will differ from the regular player, maybe the casual player or just a more average player. So I do take that into consideration while I'm making these points. And the next thing I wanted to get into was the matchmaking system. Marathon, as we know, uses a level-based matchmaking system, so you will be prioritized into your raid with people that are similar level to you. Maybe you're level 100, you'll be put into your raid with some 90s, maybe some 110s, and then it kind of loosens up as the population dies off. But it is that level-based system that we see, and in terms of extraction shooters, I do think this is the best possible way to do it. I've thought about skill-based, I've thought about random, and with a player count like Marathons and the casual style that it aids to, I do think level-based is the best thing we're going to get here. I have noticed that this game does like to, you know, put level-based matchmaking over connection a lot of the time, and there's been plenty of instances when I've been put into North American lobbies and even some Asian lobbies in the past. This is just not on. Like, every video game that's been doing this recently, playing around with their matchmaking systems, have always been putting connection last. Connection comes before anything else, no matter what. There should be zero chance of me playing with 2 full European teammates like myself, and we go into a raid and we're in a North American lobby with the high levels on their servers. It's just not fair. It's just not the balancing that we'd like to see, especially in an extraction shooter. So as they've said recently, and as time went on, you know, they're making changes to the matchmaking, they're fixing certain bugs, they're either looking at the connection and all that. I have noticed that I'm still being put into the American lobbies, and that just shouldn't be happening. If the player count is so low that there's nobody in Western Europe to put me into a raid with, okay, I understand, but that's just never the case. Let's be honest with ourselves. I should not be put into American lobbies, should not be put into Asian lobbies, and vice versa for those players from those regions as well. So that is a concern of mine that I have noticed, and it's becoming a problem as time goes on. There was that little hiccup maybe like a week or two ago where people thought there was skill-based matchmaking in the games, and you know, I don't know, it did kind of seem like it. But what I do think has happened there is that there was that connection bug that he was talking about, or that the devs were talking about, and it was basically putting people into the wrong regions and the wrong servers on a connection basis. And a lot of people were suggesting that this was the introduction of SBMM, but then they came out and said it wasn't, it was just a regional matchmaking issue. But yeah, as it stands, the matchmaking system itself does need to be level based in my opinion. I think it works perfect. It keeps all the high levels together, people who are going to have the same kind of loot, the same kind of experience, the same kind of missions, all that good stuff. But it does need to prioritize connection and region before it does any of that, and that's just not what's happening with Marathon at the moment, in my opinion. From what I can see, I could be wrong there, but that's just what I've noticed. Okay, now the big one and my biggest gripe when it comes to this game, and like I said, there's not many gripes I have with Marathon, but this is a big one, and that is self-revives and equipment in general. The self-revive spam in this game is absolutely out of hand. People can carry 3 to 4 self-revives, as you can see in the background in some of the gameplay. If I open my inventory, I have 3 on me, you know, at any given moment in a game of cryo, and that's just because everybody else does. But the self-revive spam in this game is ridiculous. If you're in a 1v3 situation and you knock a guy, maybe you knock 2, and then you're trying to fight the third, the first 2 guys are already up within 3 or 4 seconds, depending on their implants, and there just isn't any clutch potential. Now, I get that it is a numbers game and you shouldn't really be able to 1v3, but that opportunity, that possibility should always be there in a game like this, and people are able to bring in 4, 5, 6, 7, as many self-revives as they can possibly carry, and they can just continuously spam them, and anytime you get a knock, it really doesn't mean anything, and you know, it just slows down gameplay a lot. The biggest problem with this, however, is just people getting up constantly and never being really down. So you could win a fight once, you can win a fight twice, twice, outplay a guy 3 times maybe, but he's just going to self-revive and shoot you in the back as you're fighting his teammates. So, you know, at any given moment, people are carrying 3 to 4 self-revives on them. I do understand that the developers did increase the rarity, did decrease the drop rate, I'd assume, but I haven't really noticed any difference. I'm still finding 3 per body. I'm still finding them in, you know, outposts all the time. They're not hard to find. They're not hard to get your hands on, and these do need to be changed. There's plenty of ways that they could change this, but basically just make them less overpowered. If I was able to do any changes with this, then I would limit this to 1 per person pre-raid. So what that means is before you go into a raid, you're only allowed to equip 1 self-revive, and then if you find any in raid or you pick up any off other people, that's fine. It's fair game, stack as many as you like, but as you're loading into that raid, especially in ranked modes, it should be 1 per person, and I don't know why it isn't. I don't believe anybody should have that many chances. You know, if you lose a gunfight twice, you lose a gunfight 3 times, then, you know, you should be out of the game. Like, this is out of hand. I understand if people don't agree with me here, but I do feel like this is quite a common complaint amongst players, especially people who do, you know, target that PvP style gameplay. So, but with the self-revives then, I do think they need to be capped, and I do think there needs to be a limit put on them, because as it stands right now, this is just completely out of hand. Equipment then does fall into the same bracket with me when it comes to self-revives. As you can see in the background, I am playing Cryo Archive, and if you did catch my last video with that massive raid I had, you can just see it's evident right now in the current meta of Cryo. People are spamming grenades like it's nobody's business. People are throwing grenades and grenades and grenades, and I don't know when the meta changed. I don't know when this started, but anytime you get into a fight in Cryo, the back of your mind's constantly like, okay, am I in a corner here? Am I in a tight space? Should I back up and allow these nades to go past me? You're constantly aware that there's going to be 5 to 15 grenades thrown at you at any given, you know, engagement. Now look, I get it, the game changes, meta shifts, people play differently, but with the barter system and the whole grenade thing in general, it's getting actually crazy. But this isn't the kind of meta shift that the player base should be seeing. You know, if you're you know, an average player, you're getting into Cryo, you're starting to learn Cryo, you're going to get decimated by people who put a lot of hours into this game, because if you have a lot of time, you play daily, you're always activating your barters, you have a lot of credits, you're going to have grenades upon grenades, and if you're just trying to get into Cryo, you've got no chance against these guys. You know, I don't care how good you are or how good your positioning is, if they get a couple grenades on you, well timed, you're gone, and you know, you're basically full killed after that. So very similar to what I said with the self-revives, I do think equipment should be, you know, capped. I think it should be 2 to 3 per person pre-raid. If you find any more in raid, the same goes for self-revives, then that's free game. But before you get into that match, especially in Cryo, you're only allowed 2 to 3 grenades, 2 to 3 bubbles, 2 to 3, you know, just whatever fits into your equipment slot. Now listen, I get that's probably an unreasonable request, given that it is an extraction shooter, and whatever you bring out, you should be allowed to bring in, and you don't really want to overbalance games like this. I get it. The self-revives is a different story. You should have 1 per person, because it just lends to that gameplay flow. It lends to the balancing of the fights themselves, but with the equipment and it being an extraction shooter, it is kind of hard to say, you know, just limit it, because then it's not really fair on everybody else. However, instead of adding limits to the grenades or limits to the equipment, you could also change the barter system. Just make it so you can't get 10 grenades for 1, I don't know, raw fish or whatever they're asking for in there. Like, just make it harder to access the grenades, because as it stands right now, Cryo is borderline unplayable, and it's an unenjoyable experience for most players. So we do need to look at that, and like I said, maybe limiting the grenades isn't the way to go, but something has to be done for sure. Now, I do understand how all that might sound like complaints, and you know, they do come across as complaints, and they probably are complaints in a certain way, but I really do love this game, and I want to see some good changes. I am interested to see what the guys are doing. I just want to see it, you know, improve and get better, and I want to put more hours into the game. Like I said, I'm really loving extraction shooters, and I'm really loving marathons, so it is a perfect recipe for me. I know that was a couple complaints, but in terms of suggestions then, I have been playing a little bit of Delta Force recently, and what Delta Force do is you have your starter basic map, you know, your first raid, it's called Zero Dam. You go in there, do your stuff kind of like you would on Perimeter. However, later on in the game, you can't select that map in hard mode. So what Delta Force has then is its starter map, but it's in hard mode that you can visit later on in the game. So with Delta Force then, Zero Dam, if you do queue hard mode, you go back into that raid. However, there's a gear ante, you have to bring in more loot on your character. And there's also a credit entry fee that you have to pay to actually get into the raid itself. However, when you do, All the players have better stuff on them, all the floor loot is improved, the AI is harder, and the map itself plays different. There's better stuff to find, it's harder to get through, it's harder to fight, and it does allow you to play that early game starter map once again with, you know, the same kind of level of difficulty, the same kind of level of loot that you would have felt at the beginner stages of the match. This is fantastic the way they do this, and I really want to see Marathon do this with the likes of Perimeter. You know, for me, somebody, as I said, put a lot of hours into the game, I've got a lot of loot, there just is no real reason for me to return to Perimeter unless I'm trying to fill templates or something. So if Marathon was to introduce this hard mode version of Perimeter where you had to go in with like 15k, maybe 20k, 10k, whatever, you had that gear ante, it would just make for some of those higher level players and some of those above average players to be able to play Perimeter once again. It would allow that map pool to really open up, and it would just feel like there's a lot more content in the game than there already is. Not that I feel like this game is suffering with content, but like I said before, Perimeter really doesn't have any attraction to me, and I know that goes for a lot of other players as well. The last thing I wanted to touch on was some of the patches and changes that Bungie have made throughout the game's life cycle so far, throughout Season 1. One of the main ones that I've talked about with some of you guys, some of the subscribers down below, is the Waster Shotgun nerf that came quite recently, and we all know what happened to that thing. Now, I have talked to people before who says it's a good thing, who says it's a bad thing, and look, when it comes to Bungie, this obviously affected the intended gameplay loop that they had designed for the game. Bungie had created this game, they had intentions, they wanted it to play a certain way, and obviously the Waster Shotgun was getting in the way of that. I do understand that to a certain degree. However, the Waster Shotgun was king in these close quarters engagements. Anytime you went into a bubble fight, anytime you went into a building, you and the enemy team were usually fighting each other with Waster Shotguns. Now, while that might be a problem for the developers where one gun is king overall and the meta is, you know, very hard focused on a shotgun, I do get that. However, the way they went about this wasn't great at all. Now, when I look at everything as a whole and what Bungie intended, the Waster Shotgun probably did need a nerf. However, I don't think the damage nerf or the base damage nerf that they went with was the right way to do this. If this shotgun was king in meta and it was really overpowered, then the base damage nerf to this scale is just not required because it has made the weapon redundant in close quarters engagements. If they really wanted to nerf the Waster in a meaningful way, I think maybe a fire rate or even another range, or, you know, just something else other than base damage, because what has happened, especially in games of Cryo, is these close quarters engagements, these bubble fights that we've had before, have now been replaced with the Mrmickk. The Mrmickk in this game is another shotgun that is a very high-end weapon. It's a lot harder to get than the Waster, and this is replacing the Waster completely in these close quarters engagements. Now, what that means is something that we've touched on throughout this video, is it's gonna like push away those casual players and stop casual players being able to get into these close range gunfights, because the Waster has been completely nullified. I mean, it doesn't even two-shot blue shields anymore, so there's no point risking your life or your teammates' loot by running in with a Waster anymore. It's just not possible. It's not a smart thing to do, and even with stack overflow, it just does not perform even half well in my opinion. So like I said, the meta has been switched to the Mrmickk, which I thought was going to happen when they did announce this nerf, and it has. Now, what the problem is with this is the Mrmickk is a very hard weapon to get. It's more of a high-end, high-tier loot weapon, so if you're trying to start off into the game, you're an average player and you want to get into Cryo like we've discussed before, it's going to be even harder now because you're probably not going to have any Mizzies, and the guys that you're going up against, trust me, all three of them have them and about 5 bubbles each. So it's just not fair on these casual players, and I do understand that these nerfs and changes that they're making are aimed for that casual player base, but what they're doing is kind of, you know, alienating them in a way and stopping them from being able to compete. And anybody that wanted to get into Cryo before, it's just becoming more and more difficult for them, especially as people get richer, especially as the good players get better. Well, look, listen, as I said, probably this nerf was needed, right? But if they were going to do it this way, maybe they also reduce the base damage on the Mizzy too, maybe even the odds, or they just go with the different nerfs surrounding that Waster shotgun. While I do think Bungie are making the right decisions and they do know what they're doing when they're making these patches, this one particularly just didn't feel right with me, and I don't know if that's just a personal opinion thing, but it just, you know, the Waster shotgun just didn't need that base damage nerf in my opinion. But who knows, you know, everybody feels differently. Bungie have obviously made patches and balancing changes since the game's release. A big example of this would be the knife. You know, the knife is perfectly balanced now in my opinion. They did a really good job of that. Before, people were just utilizing the knife in all close range engagements and weren't even using any type of weapon, you know, not even shotguns, like any gun at all. People were just electing to use the knife. They made a patch, the damage was reduced, all that good stuff, and I still do get kills with the knife, but it's not going to be something that I choose to use straight away in a close quarters engagement, and that's the way it should be, and they did a good job with that. So clearly Bungie know what they're doing. They're making the right decisions here and there, and I'm looking forward to seeing what balancing changes that they bring with them in the future. You know, that's going to be it for me when it comes to the changes and the different things that have been happening throughout this season. But what I do want to say is we have a lot coming up, and I am really enjoying playing this game. I mean, every time I go into a raid, especially Cryo, it's just massively addicting. Every PvP encounter is addicting, and even with the changes and shifts that we're seeing with the meta and the balancing, every time I play this game, I just want to play more, no matter how frustrating it can get sometimes. As you all know, that has been teased with the roadmap and also mentions from the devs, we are getting a new runner shell coming up here in the next season. It's going to be called Sentinel, or he's going to be called Sentinel, I do predict. And I think this is going to evolve something like a trophy system or something to nullify equipment, which is kind of what I was talking about in the video being a problem with the nade spam and stuff that's been going on in Cryo, and I would only assume in other maps as well. This character, if he does have a trophy system, would be very useful to teams and probably would see, you know, that kind of pick rate that we'll see with Recon now coming after the patch that happened for Recon. I do think that the balancing changes and stuff that Bungie have been doing, they do kind of overcorrect on themselves. Like with the Recon, with the Waster Shotgun, they probably both needed a nerf and a buff here and there, but I do think they're overcorrecting and not really finding the sweet spot when they're making those decisions. But other than that, you know, these guys are doing a really good job. They delivered a very good extraction shooter despite all the hate that they were getting coming up to the release of this game. I am going to wrap it up there though, boys. If you did make it all the way to the end of this video, I thank you very much. You know, I'm not going to ask you to like or subscribe or anything silly on this one, but thanks again for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts or anything you think about the game, anything at all, please leave it down below. Other than that though, God bless, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.